Yugoslavia, the Belgrade area, the more northerly areas. These are not designed to go after tanks and so forth in Kosovo.
A lot of worries.
8 nights and several days of bombing have not convinced President Slobodan Milosevic to cease the alleged ethnic cleansing and killing. What will it take? The administration says more of same.
We are making progress in our goal to damage and diminish Yugoslav forces that Mr. Milosevic has been using in the past and continue to this day to use in his ethnic cleansing operations. And we intend to stay the course.
But a growing number of critics say the bombing will not work. They suggest a number of alternatives. First and foremost, ground troops in Kosovo.
Our model here is Kuwait. Kuwait was invaded by Iraq. We went in and kicked the Iraqis out, and we're still there in order to protect the Kuwaitis. We need to do exactly the same in Kosovo.
Military experts warned that any ground force would have to be big. Though officially the administration says no ground troops before a peace deal, troop options are being quietly discussed at NATO and in Washington. One idea is to create a safe haven, to send in troops to hold one part of Kosovo.
My guess is if you're going to go in and carve out a part of Kosovo or all of Kosovo or some part within which you can accommodate the 1.6 million or so people left there, the Kosovar Albanians, you would probably need 30 to 50,000 NATO troops, and they would need to go in very quickly.
There are also those who argue that military force will never achieve the real goal.
I think that...
It on for 18 hours, a massive land and air operation by NATO troops and the Macedonian army. The effort only ended when the 3 missing Americans showed up on Serb TV. They had been part of a 3-vehicle routine reconnaissance patrol along the border with Serbia, part of their role in protecting NATO troops waiting to go to Kosovo to police any peace deal. NATO insists the Americans were 3 miles inside Macedonia, but that is still, in effect, hostile territory. Rugged with a badly demarcated borderline, the area is populated mainly by ethnic Serbs. NATO is considering the possibility that local people may have been involved in the men's capture. The massive influx of ethnic Albanian refugees from Kosovo has fueled anti-NATO anger among some Macedonians. The refugees are still officially welcome, however, and the need to curry the favor of the West will keep it that way. In addition to help in coping with the refugees, the Macedonians are also looking for NATO security guarantees because, as a senior Western diplomat put it, they see NATO backing as the only way to send a clear message to their neighbors, especially the Serbs: don't mess with us. That the Serbs have conducted the first cross-border incursion of the war will heighten concerns among both NATO and the Macedonians. In the meantime, the American troops who are here put on an air of business as usual. But underneath it, they were almost certainly wondering when they might see their 3 brothers in arms again, and what the Serbs might try next. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, on the Kosovo, Macedonia.
Fighter planes to the Balkan war zone, stepping up a still carefully measured bombing campaign that today did hit targets all over Yugoslavia. Still, U.S. officials acknowledge that air power alone cannot, much less immediately, stop the Serb offensive in Kosovo. David Martin, one of the reporters who broke the story last night of the capture of the 3 American soldiers, has the latest tonight on the air war from the Pentagon.
B-1 bombers flew into England from the U.S., refueled, switched crews, and took off again, racing into battle on night 9 of the air campaign. A campaign which an angry Secretary of Defense says can't stop ethnic cleansing, but is better than doing nothing.
We had to consider whether or not we could sit on the sidelines and watch indifferently while 40,000 troops went on a rampage through Kosovo, while NATO took no action whatsoever.
The Air Force is doubling the number of stealth fighters as NATO continues to bombard the Pentagon with requests for more forces. Everything from tank-killing helicopters to another aircraft carrier. Military officers admit stopping Milosevic is turning out to be tougher than they thought.
We hoped that he would quickly get the message and not continue with his repressive plans.
There are some signs that blowing up fuel dumps and downing bridges are starting to take their toll on Serb troops in the field.
We know that many units in Kosovo are now running low on diesel and lubricants.
But NATO's battle map shows the capital of Belgrade was not hit at all last night, partly because the weather was so bad none of the stealth fighters were able to drop their bombs. partly because some NATO countries are still too worried about civilian casualties.
According to intelligence,
Americans.
I wouldn't say vulnerable. Certainly it's been an added incentive to sort of look at ourselves, but personally I'm happy with the measures we've got in place.
And commanders here insist they're doing everything they can to protect their men from Serbian attack.
Well, I think we are well trained, well prepared. Our soldiers are well briefed. We know what the threats are against us, and I don't believe that the same will happen.
Tonight we found these French troops on duty just a few hundred yards from the Serbian border in the same area where the Americans were captured. For all the soldiers here, the danger of serving in a faraway land suddenly seems to have hit home. These NATO troops are on a heightened state of alert today. There is real tension here. They are right on the border. And with 3 of their American colleagues captured, each one of these soldiers must wonder whether he could conceivably be next. Ben Brown.
Some troops would mean casualties, and any such force would have to be big.
If we go in, we better go in as the meanest junkyard dog over there, tough enough to knock down any resistance and to make sure we can protect the forces that we put in there.
Though officially the administration says no ground troops before a peace deal, troop options are being quietly discussed at NATO and in Washington. One idea is to create a safe haven for ethnic Albanians, to send in troops to hold one part of Kosovo.
I think it would require tens of thousands of NATO troops, and they'd have to go in shooting, and they'd have to go in quickly.
There are also those who argue military force will never achieve the real goal.
I think that
when the Nazis overran Europe and killed millions during World War II, and only after U.S. territory was attacked. Today, the U.S. is leading the charge against the Belgrade government.
do we have to wait for the train wreck to occur, where we have bodies all over the place, before we act? We have been down this road before, and I think preventing conflict is every bit in our interest.
Through most of this century, Yugoslavia was a quiet place, remembered in the 1980s mostly for hosting the '84 Winter Olympics. Yugoslavia's Cold War dictator, Marshal Tito, kept his distance from the Kremlin, but inside Yugoslavia, he suppressed long-standing ethnic and religious tensions. When the Soviet Empire collapsed and Tito died, those ethnic and religious divisions broke into nationalism, fueled by a new dictator in Belgrade, Slobodan Milosevic. What had been a single nation began fracturing in the early 1990s in a series of wars. Croatia emerged. Slovenia was created. Bosnia gained independence amid the region's bitterest conflict. Macedonia became a separate country too. Milosevic retreated to protect what was left of Yugoslavia, a string of regions called Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. Today's conflict is over ethnically distinct Kosovo's demand for independence.
Yugoslavia is not threatening anybody. Has Yugoslavia attacked some other country? Has Yugoslavia forces gone out of our borders?
Serbia's attacks have been confined within its own borders. In
stealth fighters to 24 because the stealth fighter that went down last week is also being replaced. The F-117 stealth fighter can be very effective flying deep into hostile territory. However, they are hampered in dropping their weapons when there is bad weather, and there is still very bad weather in the area. And NATO says about 400 planes are involved in these bombing missions. Publicly, they say the campaign has been effective, but still they admit their air operations have done very little to actually stop the Serb assault in Kosovo. They did say they finally had some success in operations directly against armored forces on the ground in Kosovo. They said this morning that 4 armored vehicles were destroyed in one air assault, and they say those vehicles were involved in an actual assault against innocent civilians in Kosovo. Colleen?
And Aaron, what have Pentagon officials...
Military muscle. Russia is sending several warships to the Mediterranean, and that has the United States worried about a possible confrontation with NATO vessels. Russia counters that it has no intention of getting involved in the conflict militarily. Even so, Both Russian Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov and Defense Minister Igor Sergeyev say NATO's unilateral action sets a bad precedent.
What has happened with Yugoslavia today can happen with any country, and not just a European one. It can happen with any country that wants to carry out an independent policy. NATO is trying to establish an indisputable dictatorship in the Balkans. Yugoslavia has been the weak link for NATO implementing this plan.
The debate in Russia over just what to do about NATO and Kosovo is sparking angry disagreement in the Duma, or the parliament. On Wednesday, a Communist Party lawmaker interrupted a speech by a liberal member who spoke against any Russian involvement. As reported on Russian television network ORT, the communists favor military assistance to Yugoslavia.
With their armaments still attached, their weapons not dropped. Apparently the pilots unable to determine the targets, and rather than risk strikes in civilian areas and not their military targets, they returned to base with their bombs still on board.
An eye on the conflict in Yugoslavia. CNN's Steve Harrigan reports.
In its first show of force since NATO airstrikes began over Yugoslavia, Russia is sending a Navy ship from its Black Sea fleet to the region with a warning that more could follow. The Liman, a reconnaissance or so-called spy ship, left its dock in Sevastopol early Friday morning. Its mission, according to the Russian defense minister, is not to fight, but to provide intelligence.
The purpose is to collect more detailed information. We should have such information in the interests of Russian security.
But defense analysts say that intelligence, if shared with the Serbs, could prove dangerous to NATO's ships in action.
Of course, it will do lots of harm. The Serbs will be knowing when the NATO planes are coming, how many, what speed, what type, where to.
The defense minister says as many as 6 more vessels, including warships, could be sent to the region during the next few days, depending on how events develop. As the NATO strikes continue, the pressure builds in Moscow for Russia to do.
The degradation of strategic targets and FRY forces in Kosovo, despite the risks. The FRY army and special police are already paying a heavy price for their campaign of terror and crimes against humanity in Kosovo. In Kosovo, as you can see on the ground activity slide, the Yugoslav army and MUP continue to press their offensive in the Maleševo and Pagaruša region, while continuing to mop up in other areas. However, the UÇK has not been defeated. They continue to gather recruits and regroup and regenerate in preparation to re-enter their struggle. Serb paramilitaries, locally raised militias, continue to terrorize ethnic Albanians and take advantage of the situation to loot and pillage. We have some before and after pictures of houses in Kosovo giving evidence of their destruction. This is by FRY forces of ethnic Albanian property. As you can see from the slide, whereas their previous actions were scattered through Kosovo, the results of their brutal activity has now produced a single large triangular area of ethnic cleansing operations. Our first series of images shows the homes in the city of Jakovica in southwest Kosovo. The first shows the houses as they were prior to Serb security force action. The second follows action. And if you can see from the slide and look at the roofs, there is definite and precise degradation and destruction of those buildings. As I told you, those 2 clips are attacks against an airfield and are part of a coordinated multi-aircraft attack. On the second clip, you will see the The next shot is of another airfield, home of the fighter bombers which have been engaged in operations in Kosovo. The next video is of an army facility. This complex is significant in that it is the support base of the 243rd Mechanized Brigade, currently operating in the Pagurusha Valley. It is also a base for the MUP Special Police Detachment. It will give you an interesting view taken from the front of the weapon rather than the aircraft. While I still await the opportunity to show you good imagery of our success, the next slide of last night's activities gives you an indication of our very real and significant campaign to disrupt and degrade Serbian ability to deploy effectively and to use its fielded forces in Kosovo. We know this is directly impacting their operations. We have, despite the weather, pressed home attacks against his fielded forces. The intensity of our attacks and their effectiveness is being improved greatly by the latest additions and increases to our air order of battle. Our flexibility and adaptability to meet this challenging scenario expands daily. We will continue to mount our operations with untiring resolve and increasing effectiveness. Before I conclude, I would like to show you some footage of one of the bridges that we have recently dropped. First, let me show you the view from the cockpit. From the second clip, kindly produced by Serbian television, and for which we are very grateful, you will note that the civilian housing either side of the bridge is undamaged, evidence of the precision of our attacks. As Sakir stated yesterday, we have adapted our target list to include infrastructure targets which are of direct importance to Serb military and police forces. And this, as a major line of communication, is such a target. And by a line of communication, I mean a major route across which vital military logistics, supplies, and equipment, and troops are transported.
Those were a data-linked, remote-controlled missile, which means it would have come out of probably, I suspect, the B-1 bombers that took off from Fairford last night, since they're equipped with it. And those have obviously shown great ability to fly through, well, under the cloud, and then they can be steered by a bombardier straight into the target. This is one of these pictures here, as you'll see.
From on board the missile itself, which
yes,
is always a bit...
and there's a data link. It goes back to the launch aircraft, and there's literally a guy with a joystick, almost like it is a toy game, who can control the missile. The advantage of this is, let us say, you find that your target is the wrong target, or it's going to perhaps hit a hospital instead. At least with the joystick, you can steer the missile away.
What's the disadvantage, though? Because why didn't they use them before, if that's the case?
Well, the disadvantage is they didn't have any available, and I suspect it's taken them a good few days to get them out of storage in the United States and fly them over. The other one is the weapons are pretty big. They were about 3,000, 3,500 pounds in total. A lot of the aircraft can't actually carry them, and then, even if they can, are they actually equipped to use them? So with the appearance of the B-1s, I suspect that's the launch platform.
OK, Francis, let's just go back to the NATO brief. A British plane is on its way to Macedonia, packed with emergency aid for the tens of thousands of ethnic Albanians fleeing Kosovo.
As the scale of the refugee crisis is unfolding, the aid agencies are stepping up their efforts. Overnight, a huge cargo plane laden with 20 tons of aid took off from Stansted Airport. Oxfam sending 10 water tanks. Each one can hold 10,000 litres.
Water is a basic need. I mean, people can provide without, they can manage without food, they cannot manage without water. It's also the underpinning of people's health.
Desperately needed clothes, food and blankets have been arriving in the Balkans from across the world. Charities have been asking...
Arrived back at RAF Fairford after another night of air raids. And with 12 more stealth bombers joining existing forces, the Allies are determined to stay the course until the Serbs back down. Faced with continuing bombardment, Belgrade is fighting back with propaganda. Yugoslav television shows NATO aircraft graphically manipulated into the sign of the swastika, with the message, "Down there are people like you."
During next week.
Today, it seems, the British people truly began to respond. At this supermarket, we saw some donating as much as £20.
I get choked if I talk about it. That's just it. I just feel so sorry. I think something should be done to help them.
Hello, Action Against Hunger, Kosovo Emergency Appeal.
The phones at this aid agency have been ringing all morning. One worker here, Francis Mason, flies out to Macedonia tomorrow.
I believe we've raised up to about £3,000 so far this morning, but we hope that it'll increase a great deal more than that.
And it's not just money. Overnight, a huge cargo plane laden with aid took off from Stansted Airport. Across the country, in warehouses like this one, the relief effort is gaining pace. Many companies are donating products they know are desperately needed in the Balkans. In Bradford, the catalogue firm Gratin today packed up a load of goods ready for shipment, whilst other companies are sending products for the children caught in the crisis.
The products we're going to send are things like nappies here and wipes to keep the child clean. There's a problem with water, so these are the reasons we're sending this type of product. We're also sending products like layers of clothing like bodysuits and sleep suits so that the child can be kept warm.
It could be a week before these goods arrive. Already, clothes, food and blankets have been arriving in the Balkans from across the world. But witnesses here say...
I understand is, first of all, didn't they anticipate that bad weather stops you striking some of these targets?
They're saying, yes, of course they did. They knew March would be not brilliant at all, but that doesn't explain why they're now having to call up aircraft which can deal with it better. I think they thought it would be a little bit of an issue, but not as big of an issue as it has been. But certainly missions are still going on. It's possible to see how the bombing campaign has changed over the last couple of days. If you remember, in the early days, basically the big areas of targeting were here. Well, that's now changed, and it's being concentrated fully around Kosovo, and indeed in the last 24 hours, 5 target areas in Kosovo. There were then 3 basically just to the east, and 2 just on the northwest border. So it is very much concentrating on the zone down south in Kosovo. They're saying all of them are going for the units involved in the ethnic cleansing.
Now, we are getting some extraordinary pictures back, aren't we, of the accuracy of some of these bombs.
Certainly, if we look at this one, and again, well worth pointing out that over on this side, you will see what the pilot is seeing through his head-up display. This is an attack on an airbase, and you can see from this line here, the pilot is manoeuvring, he's banking towards the left.
And they've actually got the camera on the front of the bomb or missile, haven't they?
This one will be coming up. This is something we haven't sort of seen since the Gulf War. All the previous attacks they've certainly shown us have been of laser-guided bombs where you've got a camera in the aircraft but not in the nose of the missile. Again, this is another laser-guided bomb attack, and actually it is just to the right of the previous shot we saw. This was described as a coordinated attack on an airfield